Welcome to Running on Ice, the coolest community in freight. I'm your host, Mary O'Connell, bringing you the latest tech updates, warehouse news, and everything happening in the cold chain world. Not only is there the coolest show in freight, but there's also Running on Ice, a newsletter that could not be colder. You can subscribe to that on freightwaves.com/runningonIce. Today, we are welcoming Christina Griever-Wilson, Senior Program Manager of My Green Lab. Thank you so much for joining us today.
No problem. Happy to be here.
I am really excited about today, mostly because anytime I get the chance to corner someone, I will always talk their ears off about sustainability and all of the inefficiencies that exist in like everything that has to do with temperature controlled storage, freight, everything like that. And what do you know? That's your guys' specialty. So before we get too far into it, let's get some background on you and kind of how you got involved with My Green Lab and the Freezer Challenge.
Sounds good. Well, great to be here. Excited to have this conversation with you. So I work for a nonprofit organization called My Green Lab, and My Green Lab was founded back in like 2015 by a scientist, a neuroscientist who wanted to bring sustainability into the work she was doing at the lab bench. And the organization has grown from there. And the Freezer Challenge is actually one of our programs. We have many. But it's also a joint program between us and another nonprofit, the International Institute for Sustainable Labs. So, I've been with My Green Lab since 2019 in a variety of roles. Started out doing marketing and then moved to operations. Now I'm on the programs team, and we are the team that administers My Green Lab's programs. But I support My Green Lab certification, and I lead on the International Laboratory Freezer Challenge and have done so since 2021, basically. And there's a team of us at My Green Lab that support the Freezer Challenge, make sure that we are supporting scientists and technicians all over the world that want to do this program, including Namrata, who's our marketing manager, and two folks on the programs team. And I think it's sort of interesting. So before I was with My Green Lab, I was at the University of Colorado Boulder, and I worked for their Green Labs program there, which is a sustainability program dedicated to helping the research labs at that university with being more efficient, resource efficient. And these types of programs are popping up all over the United States and all over the world. I would say they kind of started in academia, and now biotech and pharma organizations are running Green Labs programs too. My Green Lab, we are a different entity. We are a nonprofit that sort of supports this whole ecosystem. But when I was at the University of Colorado Boulder, I actually worked for a woman who was one of the founders of the Freezer Challenge, or the creators of it, and we participated in it. So we roped about 25 labs into doing the Freezer Challenge that My Green Lab and I2SL were running. This was back in probably 2018 that we did this effort. We had a competition on campus. We leveraged the data from the International Laboratory Freezer Challenge to make it happen. So before I came to My Green Lab, I had sort of been on the outside looking in at what the Freezer Challenge did and what it could do for laboratories. And it was a good time. And now I'm really happy to be leading on this program.
What a nice full circle moment. You started in it and then now here you are helping other people do it.
Totally. It's been a blast.
So you've mentioned it a few times, and it's the International Laboratory Freezer Challenge. Can you break it down for us, kind of explain what it is and what the overarching goal behind it is?
The Freezer Challenge is a program that any laboratory in the world can take advantage of, and it happens on an annual basis. Since about 2020, we've been running it from January 1st to July 1st every year. So if you missed the boat on the 2024 competition that will end on July 1st, you can always sign up and do it in 2025. And we have lots of laboratories that do it every year because it's a great opportunity to really focus in on your cold storage, get some points. If you do really well, get some credit and recognition for doing those efforts. The Freezer Challenge is completely free for laboratories and organizations to do, and it's made possible by corporate sponsors that sponsor My Green Lab and I2SL to run this program. These are lab product suppliers, people that are making laboratory grade refrigerators and freezers, as well as some of the monitoring companies, and also some biotech and pharma companies that really just believe in this mission. So those sponsorships make this program free for everyone, and any lab in the world can do it. And really the crux of this program, and the reason why it exists, is that laboratory cold storage is a very significant large category of equipment. You have refrigerators, you have -20 units, ultra lows, or sometimes called -80s. You have cryo storage, and all various sizes. And these units are sitting in laboratories around the world. It's an equipment type that often is forgotten until something goes wrong. So you have a room that's full of these units. You have a biorepository that has hundreds of these units. And they are in use on 24/7, 365 days a year until they fail. And there are things that you can do to prevent them from failing sooner than their end of life. So they're very energy consumptive. As you get colder, of course, that tends to result in more energy consumed per unit. So we have hundreds of thousands, millions of these around the world. And this is an equipment category in labs that really deserves our attention. And they are in academia, they are in healthcare, they're in the biotech and pharma sector, government laboratories, even, food and beverage. Those companies have laboratories, quality assurance, R&D, whatever it is, these units are around. And so it's really important to turn our attention to them. We can make them run more efficiently by doing things like preventative maintenance. And we can also take care that we're only storing what we need to, so we don't need to grow our cold storage fleet more than is warranted. And of course, in all the work that My Green Lab and I2SL do, sustainability needs to go along with the research that's being conducted in these laboratories. The research is of utmost importance. That's the point. That's the purpose. But there's many things that we can do as scientists to just consider sustainability and make sure our equipment and the way we operate is being done in the most efficient way possible to conserve resources, whether it's energy, water, reducing our waste, reducing our chemical use. So second only to fume hoods. Fume hoods are another big area where there's a lot of focus in sustainability and research. But second only to fume hoods is the cold storage category. This is a very big energy consumer in terms of a class of equipment.
I was gonna say, we unfortunately don't have much of an audience for fume hoods, but but for the cold storage part, I mean, it's something that's extremely crucial because also most of these research facilities, most of these labs, most of these places that are having that do have this huge repository of cold storage units, it takes, those are very expensive, and most of the time you've already kind of begged, borrowed, and stealed and wormed your way into the budget enough to get maybe one freezer or a second. And there's not necessarily always a blank check that's like, oh, you want another freezer or this one broke? Okay, here you go. It's a very expensive piece of equipment that nobody really wants to buy more than one time or buy more often if they need to.
Yeah, that's a great point.
I personally love this because I am, like I said, I am a sustainability girly through and through. It is something that I think a lot more people should be doing more with because obviously everyone's like, oh, well, if you recycle, if you, cut down on your single plastic use, that's great as like an individual consumer. But some of the biggest offenders are large organizations that, like, they have a much higher impact on various different aspects of climate change. So like, yes, while I might be able to compost and while I might be able to recycle and do more there, ultimately, like, me caring about my individual thing is gonna pale in comparison to a larger organization. So I absolutely love this, and I wish it was mandatory for everyone to participate in.
It would be amazing if we can get more and more scientists to do it each year. Right now, it's voluntary, flexible, fun. It's a competition. But I do see that more and more organizations are kind of building the freezer challenge into their sustainability goals and plans, or if they have a Green Labs program, it's a major effort of that program each year. So at some organizations, it's becoming less optional. It's really driving sustainability goals and targets.
I think that's such an easy win, because like you said, it's free to participate in. It's a challenge. And if you win, you get to brag to everybody else, like how much better at like sustainability you are than them. And I think that combined with other practices you might have in your lab, whether it's, like not ordering as much, carrying less inventory, stuff like that. I think that is really going to be an easy win to cut down on some of those carbon emissions and hit those sustainability goals, because it's overall it's not a significant investment to get a pretty high return.
One thing that this conversation makes me think of is that we often forget that, cold storage units are actually rejecting a lot of heat into our laboratory buildings. And if you have cold storage units, refrigerators, and freezers that are not running efficiently, they're going to reject more heat. And that's actually driving ventilation in your building. So not only, as a scientist, like it's important to take care of your cold storage units, protect your samples, which is why you have these units in place in the first place. But scientists can forget that they're also, or they might not even know that they're actually impacting the ventilation of their building, which that's a whole different ballgame, a whole different level of energy consumption. And so it's just another reason for making these units run most efficiently.
100%. And also, if I just take an hour out of my day once a week, once a month or whatever, just to go check on it, what are some of like the common preventative maintenances that people do on these units? Is it kind of something as similar as like when you vacuum out the back of your home refrigerator, like to keep the dust off of it? Is it stuff like that? Or is it something where, you have to get your hair dryer and defrost your stand-up freezer in your basement?
I'll remind everyone that the freezer challenge is really flexible. So the way the competition works is there's sort of a score sheet that labs can work through at their own pace, and they decide which actions they want to do. One of the categories of topics is preventative maintenance. So it's things like brushing the frost out of the cabinet of your freezer on a regular basis, making sure your door gaskets aren't clogged up with ice and breaking that off gently so you don't break your door gaskets, cleaning the filters and either vacuuming or brushing the coils. And then if your unit has so much frost built up that it's really become hard ice and you actually have a hard time getting your racks or your sample drawers or your sample boxes in and out, that's when it's time for a full defrost. So that's another one of the preventative maintenance actions. And then there's other ones that I just mentioned that can be done with your samples still in place. But for a full defrost, you do need some swing space. You need another unit that you can move your samples to safely. And we encourage people to just power off their empty unit, let it thaw out, clean it, and then power it back on.
How long, this is just me being morbidly curious, how long does it take to defrost something that might be at, I don't know, like minus 20 Celsius?
I've never sat around and waited.
You never took it with a stopwatch?
When I was at the University of Colorado Boulder, we did have a shared freezer program, and I did a lot of this preventative maintenance. But what we usually recommend is just if you have swing space available for your samples, do that. And then on a Friday, when you're leaving the lab, power your unit off, prop the door open, put down some absorbent pads, or even recycled cardboard, like something from the recycling unit, lay down cardboard so it's going to absorb anything that leaks out of the unit, prop the door, and then leave for the weekend. And it should be dry by Monday. So then you can finish wiping down the units and turning it back on. So I haven't actually sat around and waited to see how long it takes to do those.
That should be a point, is someone sitting there with a stopwatch timing how fast it takes. But I just didn't know if it was you basically lost a couple days or a week or a month worth of storage or productivity out of the machine. But if it's just a weekend, that seems pretty straightforward. Because then I guess you would spend, after you cleaned it out Monday, it would take a day or so to get back to that ultra cold temperature, and then You just slide everything back in and carry on with yourself.
Yeah, exactly. And we don't encourage full defrosts unless you really need it. There's all those other actions you can do.
I was going to say, I would hope if you're taking proper care of your machines, you would not need to do a full defrost very often.
Yeah, and one thing people don't realize is that if you don't know where the samples that you need are in your freezer, keeping the door open while you're searching is actually contributing to faster buildup of frost. And so having an accurate inventory of your samples, being able to open the door and know where you're going is also really important for keeping your unit running efficiently, not building up frost, and also for the protection of your samples. It's really a bummer when you have a lab member that doesn't take inventory seriously and has the door open for 5 minutes, your unit's alarming, your temperature is warming on the unit. Maybe an alarm actually gets sent out, like email or text communication. So it can be a whole big thing. So this is another aspect of the freezer challenge is materials management, encouraging people to have an inventory, keep their inventory updated, having remote alarm devices, encouraging people to shift towards higher density storage. Basically, the purpose of that is whatever volume of sample you're storing, make sure you've got the right size tube and don't have a giant tube for a small sample. And then also sample cleanouts. Are you storing things that have expired, are mislabeled, are in duplicate, belong to someone who left the lab 5 years ago, 7 years ago? That sort of thing is really essential to look into materials management and being good with those practices.
I mean, I would hope that there's not samples from someone 5 years ago, unless it's like some really critical research. But I mean, look, sometimes you just gotta sort through, do a little check to see what else in this freezer.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, for any lab, having kind of an offboarding process for people, I mean, people move on. You know, folks start in academia and they move on to the private sector. They start in academia and they move to a different lab. And if you don't have a process for not only like cleaning up their lab bench and getting their lab notebooks, but also dealing with all the samples that they generated over their, tenure there, that would be a reason why you might need to grow your cold storage fleet because you run out of space and you're not managing what you have in there. And these are units that are consuming significant energy. So it's very important to pay attention. And you don't want to shell out another 15 grand for another ultra low if your lab doesn't need to.
Exactly. So jumping on that, that kind of success of cleaning out those inventories and other things, what are some really cool success stories? Like, I guess, what are some of your favorite things that you've seen and gone, oh, if we did this, like through this program, we were able to save so much, or some of the cool awards that have come out of this entire thing?
So the Freezer Challenge program has grown a ton in recent years. We went from like 200 labs engaged in 2020 to we almost had 2,000 labs finish the program, submit their score sheets back to us in 2023. And so that in and of itself is just an incredible success. That means that thousands of scientists are aware of the Freezer Challenge now. We had 27 countries engaged around the world last year, over 170 different research organizations participating. And it really varies. Some research organizations have a couple labs that do the competition. Some outliers are like AstraZeneca is a sponsor of My Green Lab and has been engaged with a lot of our programs for many years. They had 60 different sites from around the world participating in the Freezer Challenge in 2023. So that's many labs per site. The University of Alabama, Birmingham is a trailblazer and a leader in the Green Lab space. And they have a powerhouse Green Labs program. And I think like 220 of their laboratories on their campus completed the program last year. And that's only grown in recent years. UAB participates every year. There's friendly rivalries among Green Labs programs, particularly in the United States, but that's growing elsewhere. The National Institutes of Health participates every year. We've had labs in like the Netherlands, Australia, Denmark, Indonesia, Zimbabwe, Canada, Germany, the United Kingdom, all win either lab awards or organization awards. in the last 5 years. So it's just incredible to see what people have done. And like I said at the beginning, many labs don't do it all. You don't have to do the whole score sheet. It's about 25 different actions to choose from. Some groups only do 3, and that's okay. But what we saw last year in the 2023 Freezer Challenge is we estimated 20 million kilowatt hours saved by all the actions of the labs competing. And that's over 14,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide avoided through this competition. And we only hope to grow that impact in 2024 and beyond.
That is insane, like on a level I cannot even fathom. Because to go from like a couple hundred labs to a couple thousand in a very small time period, that is what we like to see. But also, like what you said, this is something that I have long since preached in sustainability is it's not overnight, you don't have to suddenly become zero carbon or have super low emissions. Like to do that overnight, while admirable, yes, but wildly unsustainable in the long term. But making those small changes and doing little things and just slowly and progressively building on top of those smaller changes that are actually lasting, to me, that is so much better. And it's such a longer term solution that, again, everyone has this thing where sustainability has to be overnight, and it doesn't. It's literally just small steps you take that could be as simple as that.
Absolutely. We have organizations that have repeatedly engaged with the Freezer Challenge for multiple years. And sometimes they actually tell their scientists that we're going to have a specific focus this year. Like we're going to do sample cleanouts and we're going to support you on that. This year, we're going to do preventative maintenance. I mean, some of the other topic areas of the Freezer Challenge that I haven't mentioned yet are like energy efficient upgrades and retiring units that are no longer needed. So, an institution might support their labs to, say, here are the oldest units. We're going to help facilitate you purchasing energy efficient ones to replace the oldest, most energy consumptive units you have. Temperature tuning is another category of action in the Freezer Challenge. So ensuring you're not storing your samples colder than they need to be. Part of that is, some people just throw everything they've got in their ultra lows, and their ultra temperature freezers at -70 or -80 Celsius, they can be consuming anywhere from 12 to 30 kilowatt hours per day. For context, a small house in the US might consume 25 kilowatt hours per day. So each of those units is like a small single family home. And that's another aspect of temperature tuning is there's a movement to get scientists to keep their ultra low temperature freezers at -70 Celsius instead of -80 Celsius. And then cutting edge practices is a whole other category. Things like having a barcoded inventory, sharing units between labs, trying room temperature sample storage, if that makes sense.
I absolutely love that. Okay, so if anyone wants more information on how to get involved in, this freezer challenge, where can they go get some extra materials?
Yeah, so everything is at www.freezerchallenge.org. That's where you can register your lab to participate. That's where we have a resources section. We have a section about the challenge, including learning about like the history of the competition and an FAQ page. You can learn about the sponsors, and you can also see who has won in the previous few years. So everything is at freezerchallenge.org to get you started. So it's not public who is participating, but you can see who has won. Yes, you can see the previous year's winners. As of now, our program is anonymous, so labs can compete, and that will be kept private unless they win. But in the future, we have plans for continuing to grow and improve this program. And in the future, we're thinking about how we can allow labs and research organizations to benchmark against others in their sector, because that will only spur this competition on further, and get people to be more efficient and take more actions. So, we're exploring like a 3-year plan of what the Freezer Challenge will become. It's a great program now, and we're looking forward to seeing how we can improve it in the future so that the lab and scientist experience gets better.
Christina, we are running out of time, but there's a question that everyone that comes to the show has to answer, and you are no exception. Are you ready for it?
I am ready.
Is cereal considered a soup?
So I went very deep in thinking about this, but no, I do not think cereal is a soup.
I like it. I also don't think it is, but I can see the point that the yesers make, but I just have to disagree that it's the wrong conclusion.
Well, and cereal applies to multiple things. Like, is it actually the substance that you put in milk, or is it the act of eating wheat product, corn product in milk? It is both. And so I don't think it can be a soup.
I don't think so either. But thank you so much for joining us today.
No problem. Happy to be here.
You can catch other episodes of Running on Ice right here on YouTube or anywhere else you get your podcasts, like Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Need more Running on Ice news? No sweat. Subscribe to the newsletter on freightwaves.com/runningonIce. See you on the internet.